Welcome to Worse Than the Borg, the Star Trek podcast for everyone. We unpack new episodes of Star Trek with Star Trek fans, new and old. Each week, we raise funds for causes near and dear to us in the name of solidarity, reconciliation, and justice. Welcome, I'm Captain Shane Holland. I am here with my number one, Ron Sly. Hello, Ron.
Hello, Shane.
And, of course, our chief engineer, Ravi Joshi. How are you, Ravi?
I'm doing just dandy.
Fantastic. We are here, as always, to talk about this week's episode of Star Trek Discovery, and I am so excited to welcome aboard this week's special guest, Ambassador Divyesh Mystery. Hey, Divyesh!
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Yay!
Collectively, we are worse than the Borg.
I will jump in with the land acknowledgement. This mission log is being recorded on Treaty 13 land, and the participants are committed to reconciliation here on Earth. We believe the United Federation of Planets would fully support the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. All tuned-in Terrans are encouraged to participate in the direct action discussed later in this log. And Divyesh is joining us from London, UK, which, you know, I don't know if there's any such thing as a land acknowledgement out there.
No, not really. They're pretty bad at acknowledging what they did.
Truly. Maybe we can just acknowledge that.
So, Divyesh, I mean, you are our guest, and we want to know, what's your background with Trek? We obviously love it and can't stop talking about it, which is why you're here. But what has your life been like with it?
So, my earliest memories of Trek, probably my dad liked to watch the Next Generation repeats on there's a TV network back in Toronto called Spiked, which was really bad action TV shows. And my dad loved to watch Next Generation repeats. I never really watched with him. I preferred reading science fiction, so I read too much science fiction in the last decade or two. And I've only really started watching Trek in the last 5 years. I went and watched all of the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager on Netflix. But I also kind of just went through it. Like, if I didn't like an episode, I'd just skip it. That probably reflects my relationship with Trek. I did watch Enterprise, and I skipped like half of it.
Well, you've probably seen more of Enterprise than I have.
Which half?
Just random episodes. If an episode was not going very well, or if it's getting really stilted, I just feel like,
There were a lot of those.
There are a lot of those.
But we need to do some Enterprise coverage in the future here on this podcast.
Oh, definitely. Divyesh, you mentioned that you love sci-fi books. I'm guessing sci-fi in general. What's your favorite franchise, or do you have one?
I guess I don't really have a favorite TV show franchise. I find this is gonna sound a little hoity-toity, but I think this is why I like Star Trek a bit more. Is I kind of like sci-fi that's not all action-based, and a lot of the TV franchises. I mean, there are a lot of fighting, a lot of robots getting exploded. Not really the sci-fi I read. I read a lot of space opera, so I like things like Ian M. Banks, Ringworld, kind of galactic kind of sci-fi.
Love it.
I'm making my way through some of the Ian M. Banks stuff right now. I definitely love that too. It just takes so long to read any of them. They're so big.
So let's start talking about Trek. I mean, what did everyone think of this week's episode? Ravi, was this as exciting for you as it was for me?
This was for sure one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Discovery in all 3 seasons. I felt the first one was very cinematic and beautiful. The second one was well paced. And I have to say, you know, there were clunky bits of writing within the second episode. This one was near flawless. It was perfect writing. I felt so entranced by the characters, by the plot advancement, how much stuff happened. I finished the hour-ish of however long it took, and I felt like I had been watching an entire feature-length movie. It was so dense, but also not in a way that overwhelmed. Somehow they managed to keep the pacing alive. I was so happy with this episode. So excited.
Me too. Ron, do you agree?
I mean, like, we wouldn't be here if we didn't agree on this. Like, they've really hit their stride. I think the writers have found their the modern storytelling with the tried and true like TNG episode model. Went through the whole thing, but I'm actually interested to hear what Divyesh has to say. As somebody who like hasn't totally digested every single episode of this franchise.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I would say with Star Trek Discovery, I've watched every episode at least twice. So I mean, I'm one of those people that skips 30 seconds ahead on Netflix if I think something's boring, and I haven't yet. So
That's awesome.
I mean, it says a lot about the storytelling. And honestly, I thought it still is pretty gorgeous, even though they're out of their Icelandic filming location.
Yes.
Like, for something that's pretty much all CGI in an episode is pretty gorgeous. And everything is pretty interesting the entire way through.
Oh, agreed. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves on this week's particular episode, I just had to bring up some awesome Trek-related news that came up this week. Did everyone know about the Captain Janeway statue that was unveiled in Bloomington, Indiana?
Yes.
That's
where the character is supposed to be born, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And in Bloomington, they have a Captain Janeway Bloomington collective devoted to, actually, it says it right on the website, which is janewaystatue.com. They celebrate her leadership, her connection to her future birthplace, Bloomington, Indiana, and the accomplishments of those inspired by her character. I think that is so sweet and awesome and nerdy.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely heard from lots of people how much Janeway, she was the first female captain, and we can get to first captains later in this episode. Mm-hmm. I mean, she truly owned that role so well, and I'm so excited this is a little bit of PR for the upcoming animated series, which is going to have Prodigy, which she's going to reprise her role as a voice actor this time.
So exciting.
For some context here, because there's always a north and south of the border comparison. I don't know how large Bloomington, Indiana is, but for some context, that would be like Barrie, Ontario, putting up a Star Trek Picard statue. And for people living in Ontario, that's a pretty big move. Like, I would go to Barrie, Ontario to see very little else, but to see a Star Trek Picard statue. And so from a tourism standpoint, you have to give this small town some big cred for putting up what could only be described as a tourist trap. I mean, it's just perfect.
It's very niche. I would go.
It's very
Next
niche.
time I'm
in
Indiana.
Niche. I think we could all agree we'd probably, if we were within an hour's drive of a Captain Janeway statue, we'd probably go. So good for you,
if
Bloomington,
the borders
Indiana.
ever open up again. Yes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ifs here. There's a lot of ifs. Well done, Bloomington, Indiana. I got to give you full points.
Yeah, we salute you. All right. Well, after the episode discussion, be sure to play along with our Trek trivia. And of course, you can help support this week's direct action, which we'll tell you more about a bit later. But let's take a very quick break, and we'll be right back to talk about this week's episode of Star Trek Discovery. Welcome back to Worse Than the Borg. We are about to start talking about this week's fantastic episode, Season 3, Episode 3, People of Earth. Ravi, do you want to give us a little rundown on what happened this week?
Let's give it a go. Okay, there are spoilers ahead, so please skip if you somehow did not watch the episode and are somehow listening to a recap episode on a podcast. Just know that there are spoilers. Okay, after Sahil is unable to locate the Discovery in the year 3188, Burnham becomes a courier and works with Book. searching for clues as to the fate of the Federation. She finds a transmission of Admiral Senatal on Earth, but is unable to get there due to their limited dilithium. After a year, Discovery arrives in the future and Burnham finds them. Saru now becomes the new captain, and Discovery's dilithium is stored on Book's cloaked ship for safety. Using Discovery's advanced spore drive, they travel to Earth and find that it is no longer part of the Federation. Investigators of the United Earth Defense Force board the Discovery and explain that Admiral Tal is dead. They are all attacked by dilithium bandits, who the Terrans attempt to destroy until Burnham and Book trick the bandits, capturing their leader Wen. In the negotiations between Wen and the Defense Force captain and Doya, the two realize that they can help each other and prevent further fighting. A young investigator named Adira reveals that she is the host of Admiral Tal's Trill symbiont and has access to his memories, concluding the episode. There is your recap in just a short minute on the episode we just watched.
This episode was directed by Jonathan Frakes, our favorite #1 of all time. Yes, and it was written by Bo Yun Kim and Erica Lippold. I mean, this episode felt like the most Star Trek episode we have seen in so long. It was pretty cut and dry from start to finish. They had a villain of the week who it turns out is an analog of some real world issue, and there are so many real world topics to talk about in this particular episode. Let's dive right in, I guess. I mean, first is the return of the pathetic follicle. We get to talk about Burnham's hair again as we see her go from, uptight new person in this strange time to all of a sudden owning herself and becoming a courier and really abandoning her former life as a Federation officer when it seems like that might never be something that happens again.
I mean, and we finally get on-screen acknowledgement of this hair arc when Tilly compliments Burnham. We were all Tilly in that moment. Oh, you might be able to hear my dog click-clacking around. I'm switch to that, sorry.
This episode had so much, and it really shows how much the writing has taken off from seasons 1 and 2, where that was good writing in season 1 and 2, but I found myself so much more immersed in the characters, and we'll get into some of this, I'm sure, but there were just so many textural differences in the way that the characters were interacting. I felt myself totally drawn in and totally attached to some of these plot lines and the relationships that they had. So it's a nod to the writers for really just taking it that extra. I think they're doing things in a much more subtle way, a much more nuanced way. There's so much more complexity to the characters that I really love.
Everything's pretty subtle except for the diplomacy, which we.
Oh yeah. Subtle like a brick, absolutely. I kind of want to talk about Captain Saru.
Yay!
Finally! Divyesh, I mean, do you love Saru as much as I think we all do?
I really do. I mean, don't get a lot of it. I mean, that's my biggest complaint about sci-fi, mostly, is we don't get a lot of aliens as primary characters. And, Saru has had a character arc, a very almost violent character arc. And kind of the blunt force.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the character development of Saru myself earlier, and how in the first episodes of Discovery, he and Burnham have such a combative relationship. They're both vying to be #1 to Giorgio in the first couple of episodes, and Burnham wins out, and Saru is really angry with Michael in that time, and the love that these two have developed, which I think is really, I shed a tear at the end when they're standing on the bridge together looking at Earth. It was so touching seeing how far these two have come and how much they trust each other and rely on each other. Really beautiful character arc for this one.
Our 88 listeners will know that in the last episode, I called it that they were going to remove that interim captain title. And thank you to you 88 folks from around the world. It's very encouraging to see this podcast grow. But one of the things I thought that one was to recite Doug Jones living into this role in such an exciting way. And two, yeah, his character and so many other characters have grown together, but they're still apart in so many ways. And that's a big theme I wanted to bring out in the characters as they've grown is, yeah, you see that Saru and Michael have grown so close together, but you also see where they're different. And there's that one scene where Saru says, I see that we have to take trust as an assume, we have to assume our trust. He says, like, I love you. We're here together, and yet we still struggle in our relationship. Was one of the most powerful parts of this episode, in the direction of the writing, is that these relationships at a surface can be simplified, sure, and they're accessible in that way. But there's so much more dynamism. I could say the same about Book and Michael, that they clearly have a burgeoning romance. It's exciting. It's just you could cut it like a stick of butter, but there's also parts where they're kind of toying with each other, and they're so far apart. And I think that's the way human relationships are, is they're never just one thing. And so it adds complexity and depth. I especially felt that with Saru and Michael, is that it's ever more clear how close they are, but not without its burdens, not without its work, its complexities, the history, the baggage there is still there. And I think that's going to be a really exciting thing to see with these characters evolve, is not their simple, coming to an end. Their arcs is, as they arc, they're going to start to grow and become more complex. I think it's so rich and so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that Michael has unclenched in the last year. She just willingly gave up the captaincy, and we all loved to see it, of course. I want to loop back to something that Divyesh was talking about how we have such a human-centric view of sci-fi, and there is not a lot of sci-fi out there that does not center on humans. And I think that this episode is really starting to demonstrate that, and we've been having this conversation in media for most of the last decade. You don't need Captain Kirk at the center of you don't need that straight white man to tell a compelling, interesting story. The fact that it's been, until we've had like a main character, non-human main character running the show, that is only now in all of Star Trek history we've gotten to a point where we can have, we love this character, we relate to them, we understand their differences, they're not like us, and it's I mean, in a weird, crappy way, it's like when Janeway was the first female captain and when Sisko was the first black captain. That was the studios testing will white people watch people that they think aren't like them? Will
we can't
men
forget
watch
that
people?
Picard was the first old captain. Sorry, go on.
But my point is, Saru sitting in that chair is joining a list of captains that is very exclusive. And I am so pleased for Doug Jones, who often gets, his acting abilities often get overlooked underneath all of the prosthetic that he wears. And so for him to join William Shatner and John Picard, Sir Patrick, and the rest of them, I hope he is feeling, the true weight of that accomplishment. I'm really, really happy. And I'm happy for the franchise now that we finally truly decentered the necessarily human experience, and it's more about the relationships between the people.
Oh, beautifully said. I really hope that they still make collector's plates for Star Trek, because I would love to hang a Captain Saru collector plate on my wall.
I want it, that graphic all the way back to Shatner, and they all just look so noble in their their formal dress. Give it.
But I am ready. I am ready now to make a bold prediction, which is that Michael Burnham is destined for a chair even greater than the captain of Discovery. I think that that's what's really happening here, is that as Saru is implanted as the Discovery's captain, I think that there's going to be, and and I forget the hierarchy within the Federation, but the chairperson of the Federation, or the of Starfleet. There's going to be there's a bigger world for Michael Burnham, and I think that we're going to see her ascend to that role.
Possibly the president.
The president. That's right. It might take it might take a season or two, but it will happen.
Divyesh, is Michael the president?
So basically rehashing.
Oh, you cut out one more time.
Okay, sorry. So basically rehashing Star Trek Enterprise then.
Yes.
Oh. Yeah.
I mean, hopefully not.
Better plot.
Season 3 was watchable. Season 3 was good Trek, and then
there's actually a couple of Enterprise references in this episode. So when they get to Earth, Saru claims to Captain Endoya that the Discovery is a generational ship, meaning that they've traveled through space for possibly hundreds of years, and they are the descendants of the original crew, which is actually what happens in an episode of Enterprise, E Squared, where the crew of the NX-01 meets an alternate version of the ship, which is helmed by their descendants. So I thought that was a pretty nifty little Easter egg, among many others. I also wanted to mention that I just learned about this today, and this is all thanks to Den of Geek, who does a great weekly roundup of trivia. Burnham is briefly past this slip containing the Starfleet Registry, NCC 4774. Apparently, the number 47 is this long-running visual gag that started in the 90s in TNG. It is a reference to Douglas Adams' 42, which is the mathematical answer to life, the universe, and everything in the Hitchhiker's Guide for the Galaxy series. And Rick Berman once joked that 47 then was just 42 adjusted for inflation. I had no idea. Apparently there's websites dedicated to finding all of the references to the number 47 in Star Trek, which is just so bizarre to me. I've never heard of this. This is like the Mickey Mouse ears thing.
Yeah, that's totally new to me. And I love Hitchhiker's Guide, so I'm glad that we have some influence in the Star Trek universe.
Also, the character Adira is a human host of a Trill symbiont, and director Jonathan Frakes played the first human host of a Trill symbiont in the episode The Host back in 1991, when his character was chosen to host a Trill at a great risk to his own. So that was a pretty nifty crossover moment as well, I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, the connection of Jonathan Frakes to this episode happens at a couple levels. Back in the Next Generation episode where he was advocating that the love interest, the non-binary love interest, would be played by a man to get across the actual non-binariness of it all, and he was shot down because of homophobia. For him to be now running directing the episode where we have the debut of the first actually non-binary character into the series is a nice bit of justice, I think, for straight man Jonathan Frakes and all non-binary people everywhere, and just kind of links back to the idea that we don't have to be like the people who we're seeing on TV. They can be, we can still see ourselves in their story, even if they are an alien or alien like trans.
Let's talk more about the character of Adira, who I already love, this little Wesley Crusher running around in 3188. Blue Del Barrio is the actor, and we've already mentioned that they are a non-binary person. Divyesh, how awesome was this new character?
Oh, I think we've hit our first. I mean, they're absolutely. It's kind of annoying in a good way.
Well, they are the Wesley Crusher of the season, so.
Yeah,
Exactly.
child actors, no matter what walk of life you are, child actors are always awful to everyone, right? Anakin Skywalker, yeesh.
Ooh.
Oh,
But I mean, for the character themselves, so everybody's referring to Adira as she currently. But in an interview that I read with Blue Del Barrio, they say that in the future it's going to be clarified because there's some history around trans representation and trills. A lot of cisgender people will say that trills represent like early trans representation, which I disagree with. And a lot of trans people also see themselves in the trill characters because there is a gender change that happens when occasionally when a trill moves from one host to the other. But for Adira, the individual who's hosting the trill is a non-binary individual, and then the trill themselves has, I don't actually know if a trill has a gender anyway. I don't even know what the gender of the admiral who also was the former host of the trill is. So I guess we will find that out in the coming episodes.
And for our listeners who are not immersed in all Trek all the time, I mean, and I think Saru did an okay job of plugging this gap a little bit, but trills are sentient beings that move from one host to the other and live hundreds and hundreds of years, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what the oldest age trill is, but this is a key thing that the host and the trill they form a merged consciousness, caring for the memories. And it actually leads me to a question that I'd like to ask open-endedly, which is that part of the problem, is that you're reconciling sort of a split consciousness? Is that because I don't think that's a fair characterization of what trans people are witnessing, and maybe that speaks to why it's not a great representation. But that's a question, like, can you have the trans narrative represented when fundamentally a trill is merging different, like it's a multi-personality piece, and is that an adequate home for this conversation? Now, that being said, this seems like a really great representation, a great leap forward. So it's probably more complex than I have probably first thought about it. Do you folks have thoughts on how that dichotomy?
Well, I think that what they're trying to do, I mean, it gets a little caught in the, you can kind of explain away the non-binary stuff. So if you have cisgender viewers who don't want to engage in that kind of thought space of this character being non-binary, then, it is kind of a backdoor for that, which is, kind of too bad. But the thing that I think is they're putting a button on this by making the unjoined character of Adira a non-binary person. So they were non-binary before being joined with the trill. And so they are trying to right away, like, merge this in and say, like, actually the trill part isn't the non-binary part. It's actually the individual who's hosting. So
and that hasn't been brought in yet. I take it.
No. So, like, we have a slightly transphobic and homophobic episode in The Next Generation where Crusher, falls for a joined trill whose host is a man, and then the trill moves to a woman and a woman host, and Crusher is no longer interested in the individual.
I watched that episode this morning, actually, kind of as
really?
background for myself. And yeah, I definitely noticed that, it's obviously homophobic and transphobic all in one breath at the end. But in a way, I'm not defending that, but in a way, I think the episode was trying to portray how backwards that thinking was. At the end, Dr. Beverly Crusher says something along the lines of, we're just not evolved enough yet to let ourselves love like this, which I think is probably how a lot of straight cis people would view this situation if they had if they've had no experience with trans representation themselves. So while, I mean, the content actually is backwards and hurtful, I would assume, I think that there is a little glimmer of what we see in this episode, which is trying to reflect the viewpoint of the time and say, you know, maybe the future will be better.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and it carries out throughout the franchise with Trills. You know, one of my favorite kind of non-binary nods is in Deep Space Nine, where Jadzia Dax is referred to repeatedly as old man, because the captain used to know Dax as an older man, and now this man is inhabiting the woman's body, and you know, I mean, the actress is just like as hot as it comes, so obviously all the nerds love her, but there's also this, you know, she has a masculinity about her that is related and acknowledged as being okay and welcome. So do we think, is this Trill, could this Trill be Dax?
Bombshell.
You hope not, Divyesh?
No, I think it's too pandering.
You know what? You might be right.
Against the characters.
Yeah.
But, you know, maybe it's a relation of Dax, and it'll have some references, but, you know, hopefully it's not actually.
Surely all Trill know Dax, right? Even through all of the generations that have been since Deep Space Nine.
There's probably a Trill meetup happening at least monthly, right? Like, how is that? Like, there's definitely a WhatsApp group.
I have so many questions about the
not
Trills
in the future.
in general.
They can't even do it. They can't even have Zoom calls between planets in the future, so right. They're stuck.
Let's talk about the isolationism thing in this episode. It's such a perfect segue.
Your brand new planet Earth, same as the first one. Just with shields.
How terrifying would it be to be a human on the planet surface and look up and see that your planet's defense shields have activated once again?
Yeah, terrifying.
I really liked the sort of the way that came. Like, it was sort of weird to see Earth not part of the Federation. It is such an anchor of the whole plot, and so to see it sort of devolved from the Federation was very provocative. I think it probably, you know, we could bring up current geopolitical things. It felt very weird and in a good way. Good writing on that part. It was jarring, and also to see Earth being so like locked down was kind of, in the Star Trek universe, it's always the home, right? It's everything's, you always come back home. So to be prevented was, as a human watching that, I felt that very jarring.
Yeah, and thematically, it kind of gets back to Enterprise, where it was the first Trek from the post 9/11 mediascape, and they kind of tried to hone in on the isolationism of the time in America with the terrorist attack on the planet in America. You know, slicing a kilometer-wide gash and killing everybody, and Tucker turns into a xenophobic bigot. But now we've gotten to a united Earth, so all types of people are represented here in this new Earth, but they are still separate and don't want to be involved.
Divyesh, did you have any thoughts on the situation that Earth has found itself in?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of odd. There's some thoughts I have on the situation that is kind of weird. But I mean, it's kind of like they fly towards Earth and there's like nothing else around it. So like they are completely isolated. Like, I'm sure they would have picked up ships flying. I'm assuming in their era there'd be ships flying all over the solar system, even if they're not warp core ships. And there's nothing, or unless they decided not to say that to our lovely audience. But also kind of like, I've seen some kind of comments that, oh, well, Earth's become isolated and xenophobic, but some of the security guards that being aboard are alien. So it's pretty much Earth has become just Earth as opposed to Earth has just become human.
Right.
That's a good catch. Like they are the united Earth, right? The people who got stuck on Earth after the burn. They found. I mean, who knows if they're a democracy or a an epocratic system or whatever, despotic, but they still seem to have. I didn't catch the aliens, Divyesh, so that was a good.
I paused. I was like, oh, that looks weird. And then I paused back and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a very strange commentary that we're all united in our xenophobia.
And fear of the unknown.
Yes. One of the most Star Trek things of this episode is the reveal at the end that the person that they're fighting is truly just one of them. I think I wrote that this reminded me of, I can't remember the name of the episode, but it's a classic, the original series episode where the aliens are half black on one side, half white on the other, and then the other alien is the reverse. It was very, very that. Did anyone else feel the same way, Ron?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was. Let's talk about the diplomacy of it all. Like they get it in, and we have this Scooby-Doo moment where they take off the mask, and it was the groundskeeper all along, and this is actually mirroring the Saru-Michael relationship that Ravi was getting to at the beginning. It's, when you talk it out and you see from other people's perspective, what was these people's whole problem? They just hadn't talked to each other in too long. Like, that was it. And then you have Saru negotiating this. And you, Earth, would you be able to provide some dilithium in return? Yes, I guess so. It was a little heavy-handed, I think, at the end. But it's the Saru. He doesn't have to be Picard yet. He'll get there. It's only his first day in the captain's chair.
Wow, brutal takedown of Saru's first day as the captain. Wow.
The audience turned on him fast, apparently. My God.
Ravi, what did you think about all of this? I mean, as Ron was saying, you already mentioned how this reflects the relationship between Burnham and Saru.
Well, and also just, I think that we have to, Star Trek is a little heavy-handed around these points. Like, I don't know of a Star Trek series that has not been heavy-handed around issues of the Federation and the noble future of the diplomacy and all that. I think that we have to sort of tolerate a little bit of that. It's rare when it's subtle. So having said that, I thought it was the right message to send to advance the plot that they need to. Right, the Federation of the future needs to be cobbled together using some principle, some fundamental principle, and tapping into the original vision of Gene Roddenberry is that people, nations and peoples talking to each other is the better way forward. And it goes back to the context in which Star Trek was made during the Cold War, on the heels of World War II. In context, that's a really good message to have sent. It kind of feels a little weird and heavy-handed nowadays, but back in the day, that was a big deal to portray that on a weekly basis. Mm-hmm. So I want to nod to where that has come from, knowing it's not maybe the most pertinent message at this moment, but to advance the plot of the Federation, 1,000 years in the future, 1,100 years in the future, they're going to need to tap into that base principle somehow, somewhere, to just sort of build the Federation up. And I think it speaks to also the scarcity that, they're coming from a base where Earth and Titan, I believe, are coming from a place of scarcity, and that they're going to learn how to cooperate through those. One of the biggest plot problems I have with Star Trek is that everything's all abundant everywhere, so there aren't any problems. And in the real world, science fiction or otherwise, they're going to be, you're going to have plot that handles the notion of scarcity, that we don't always have enough. And the problem solving that we put together when we don't have enough is really where humanity can either go down two roads. So that's really a flaw of Star Trek in general, is that if you have replicators and abundant energy and all these things and infinite land on infinite planets, then yeah, sure, it's nice to be human. It's actually the message about what we do when we don't have all those things in place, what we do in those moments. And that's what I thought this episode and this series can do a lot more of, is explaining how down and dirty and complicated it's going to get when you don't have enough to go around. That I think will be the thing. That's what I'm hoping this goes to. And I also just want to shout out the casting of Wen, because his face just sort of reminded me, he's a very gaunt human, and it just reminded me that there is this sort of privilege in mainstream casting, that we have these, you know, radiant, well-fed, well-nourished people in casting. And as a matter of advancing the plot in the story, they cast somebody who looked a little like down on his luck. And in mainstream media, sometimes you get a little bit sort of inundated with faces that are all beautiful and gorgeous and well cast, and they're all stuff. And he just looked like he had been working really, really hard for way too long. And that's a message we also need to hear, right? He
kind of looked like a tired Zephram Cochrane to me.
Good call.
Yeah,
good call. That's a good call for sure.
I think one of the last things I want to talk about in this episode was, I think, the thesis of the episode, which was growth through change. And it is really, it's obviously defined by the tree at the end, the giant elm tree, which has been mentioned in The Next Generation as the tree that Picard would study under, and that Boothby had been attending for 100 years. So we can assume that this tree is actually 1100 years old. And I think growth through change is what we're going to see through the series. We cannot continue with the Star Trek of old, which is the episodic format, this pie-eyed, everything is going to work out. We already see that this is a grittier world. This is, as we were talking about, a world where scarcity exists, and where real challenges, both external and internal, are coming to the forefront. Divyesh, how do you see growth through change affecting the rest of this season?
I think it's gonna take some plots into different directions that you wouldn't normally see. So I think like this episode was a very classic kind of, what I would perceive as kind of like a classic kind of Star Trek episode, where, you know, some ships shoot at each other and it all gets solved by talking to each other. But they're in a future where that's not the case anymore. People have chosen to go down two paths. They've chosen to go down an isolation path, or they've chosen to go down one of many paths, or like a smuggler kind of path. You know, it's not going to be the clear-cut democracy, or democracy and diplomacy. And I think that'll be really interesting for the plot, and interesting kind of character development, and kind of even universe building as well. But I also know that kind of stuff's gonna annoy the people who don't like Discovery.
I am happy for those people to be annoyed. I think that it's, building on that and what Ravi was saying about the scarcity of it all, right? Like the Next Generation, it works in that time because we're imagining a post-scarcity environment. And now we've got to see if the the values of the Federation, the values of Starfleet can survive in a world with scarcity. And we always come back to the Maquis on this podcast, and that is something that they tried to explore in the demilitarized zone arc in Deep Space Nine, when there are limitations to what you can provide, and people cannot be satisfied. Every party cannot be satisfied. What does it look like in these new times where people don't have dilithium, and the only people who can warp are the mycelium equipped? Although, sorry, I gotta interrupt myself to say, Stamets is just like fine with trampling the mushrooms now. Like, we didn't even, it was very The Next Generation, where they pretended for a while that warping was causing subspace to degrade or whatever it was. And then they just like, environmentalism is over next year, so we're just gonna pretend that we didn't have that limitation. Like, Stam is just like, yeah, sure, hook me in. Like,
and here, look, this is what I do it with.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, that's exactly how humanity deals with its issues, right? Like, it's really, really problematic for, like, 2 weeks, and then something else comes along, and then we get back to it in a few seasons, and that's that's probably one of the most realistic parts about Star Trek the way it's been written.
But do you think it was a choice, or it's just
Regression
our
through
humanity?
stabilization.
Yeah.
What happened? I thought it was. Was it all? And this is something we can cover, I suppose, in the future. But have they covered that off at all? Like, there was damage being done to the mycelium network, but I thought that was because his partner, Dr. Culber, was trapped in there. I thought that was what was causing the degradation of the mycelium network. We need to go do some digging, because I think that it wasn't that they were traveling. It was that they had a foreign entity, like a different being,
parasite almost.
a parasite.
But
that was
they
damaging
stopped. Didn't they purposely stop after?
We're going to have to research this and
We're
get
gonna
back
have to
to our
research
88
it for the
audience,
next-
our
yeah.
88 members of our audience.
Unless you know, Divyesh, I don't know. Would you?
I mean, I don't know, but I also feel like I feel like they'll probably, I mean, the thing is they're probably going to have to use the core drive, because as we've seen with Earth being so far away, I bet well, the Federation planets are all, or former Federation planets are all far away, and they're just going to have to use it.
Do you think we're gonna get, the original wagon train to the stars, and they're just gonna every week, let's visit Vulcan, let's visit Romulus, and just jump and see where do we get to check in on each of our favorite societies?
I feel like that's kind of where we're heading already. We've already done a bit of galaxy hopping in the first 3 episodes. We've done the most important check-in, which is home, and now the whole purpose of their mission now is to reunite the Federation. That would involve going to the Federation's core planets. So that, I think, is going to be what we see next. I'm very excited for that. And, having said that, we've been talking about this episode for half an hour. I think it's time we take a break, and we'll come back and do some fun stuff right after. Welcome back to Worse Than the Borg. It is time to talk about our commitment to reconciliation. And we do that every week by highlighting some direct action you can take, and also giving you a trivia question, giving you a chance to have a direct action made on your behalf. Last week, we asked, besides episode 2 of Discovery, name 4 other times we've seen a Federation starship crash land on a planet. The answer was for Star Trek Generations, Star Trek Beyond, Season 5 of Voyager, and the last episode of Lower Decks. However, I think I made the question way too difficult, so in honor of that fact, I am going to be making a donation to Aboriginal Legal Services on my behalf, and this week I am going to give you a slightly easier question. This week, I would like to know, well, actually, I'm going to set this up differently. Titan, the planet, plays a large role in this episode, but Titan has played a large role in the series. Who commanded the USS Titan? Once again, who commanded the USS Titan? You can send your answer to us at worsethantheborg@gmail.com. And perhaps, Ronnie, you could tell people who we are supporting this week.
So one lucky person who correctly answers Shane's question by sending us an email will have a donation made in their name to the Native Women's Association of Canada. They're a national Indigenous organization representing the political voice of Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people in Canada, including First Nations on and off reserve, status and non-status, disenfranchised, Métis, and Inuit. An aggregate of Indigenous women's organizations from across the country, NWAC was founded on the collective goal to enhance, promote, and foster the social, economic, cultural, and political well-being of Indigenous women within their respective communities and Canadian societies. And, we can't think of a better place to put your dollars, so you can make a donation directly to them at www.nwac.ca/donate, or you can get us to do it for you by sending us the answer. Who commanded the USS Titan?
Perfect. Now we come to a segment I love to talk about each week, which is called What the Trek? Each week, we ask our guest panelist, what the Trek? What to you, as a casual viewer or a devoted viewer, made absolutely no sense, was morally questionable, or otherwise just plain confusing about this episode, this series, or heck, even the whole franchise? Divyesh, what the Trek?
I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I'm kind of really weirded out questioning that Earth and Titan don't talk to each other. Or that, like, nobody in the solar system talks to each other, and also that, like, nobody on Discovery questioned, like, the lack of presence of anyone anywhere. Like, they zoomed from Saturn to Earth, so I'm assuming they went through the asteroid belt. I'm assuming they went past another, a bunch of other planets really quickly, and they didn't, like, you know,
They didn't think to check in?
Acknowledge it.
check in with anyone else. Didn't acknowledge that Mars isn't answering anything. I mean, I barely watched Star Trek Picard, but I kind of know what happened. But kind of like, did no one that's where the shipyards were, right? So they not figure like, oh, why are the shipyards there anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question. Those shipyards should still be there building ships. There's no reason why after the burn they couldn't still build ships. Go on, sorry.
No, I think that I think that was kind of like, my kind of. I was just like, oh, we're going to Earth, but it's kind of like, well, you're not just going to Earth, you're going to the solar system, and the only presence in the solar system seemed to have been Earth. But also, they warped near Titan. They warped near Saturn, so nobody from Titan
Reached out?
out.
No, there are no hailing frequencies, I guess, after the burn. Yeah, that's a very good question. What the heck happened? How come no one is talking to each other? Is it just a very simple plot device to keep us focused on this week's episode? Probably. But I mean, these writers have been very good about peppering in little Easter eggs about what this universe looks like. I'm surprised that no one really thought about that.
I mean, maybe that is the Easter egg. We don't know very much about how communication devolved in the solar system after the burn. It seems like one miscommunication led to deep mistrust and, constant battling. But the Discovery still has sensors. So where are all the humans all over the place, right? Definitely can still be making ships that don't have warp. You need to still fly around your solar system, I assume. I don't know.
Ravi, you look like you have something pressing
Well,
to say.
it is kind of like saying, I didn't talk to my sister in the next door room because the internet's down. It's sort of like what an excuse that a lazy teenager would use to describe, why they didn't do something simple. I assume that it's going to be, related to the scarcity and the infighting that's happened, because at the beginning, throughout most of the episode, they didn't think that Wen was human, right, because of this visor thing. So there must have been a lot of mystery. I'm sure they're going to allude to it in the future and explain it a little more, but I think that what it's hearkening to, I don't think it's sloppy. I think that they're actually going to be playing out this theme of scarcity has caused all of the Federation to sort of descend into chaos. I think it's actually going to be a pretty exciting plot point. A theme that's emerging throughout this is all of the stability and communication that was once there has now descended. That might be one of the most interesting parts about this upcoming season. And to answer the question, I think that poses a really good episodic kind of adventure, wagon wheels to the stars, is you have to go through each of the previously built up relationships, see how they've evolved over 900 years, and then try to rehash the Federation's mandate into the relationship. So in some ways, I think the answer to the question is exactly what's going to be exciting about season 3 and what we can look forward to.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. Well, I mean, have we missed anything, folks? Was there anything that happened in this episode that we just didn't talk about or that you're dying to say? Let's start with you, Divyesh.
I'm trying to think. I mean, Detmer clearly has PTSD.
I wrote the exact same thing.
How many people died? She's just always concerned about how many people are dying.
Yeah.
She's fixated. And I think, we talked about it a bit in the last episode, she was piloting the ship and people died. And that's got to be a difficult thing to sit with.
And I think they're gonna talk about it in the next episode. It looks like based on the trailer.
Oh, I didn't even watch the trailer. Oh, that's exciting. I'm very glad that we're going to dive more into Lieutenant Detmer. She's one of my favorite side characters that we know very little about.
Well, Detmer's libido appears to be in full force. Did you see that cockeye that she gave, right? I mean, she's just that expression on her face was just totally, I mean, she's sharp. She's ready to go.
Did anyone notice the shout out to, or the near shout out to our podcast on this week's episode when Book claims that this situation might be worse than the BOG?
Yes.
That's the episode title, by the way.
100%. I screamed. I literally scared the people sitting beside me.
Can I run through a couple bullet points of notes that I had that were just worth mentioning? One,
Yes.
Giorgio's "What are your intentions with my daughter?" Scene was a particular joy. Quick highlight. Book is, precariously perched. Is he Han Solo? There's kind of a Han Solo, the smuggler with a heart of gold. The table is still broken. And I've even forgotten why the table was broken in the first place. I think it might have been the battle with Control. Correct. It might have been the battle with Control. So I'm really going to be interested to see what happens with that table because it's there. But those are my three questions, the three little notes that I just didn't have a full thought on, but I was just sort of like, what was that? What just happened? So yeah, and definitely the Jojo, "What are your intentions with my daughter?" That was amazing. That was so fun.
I'm going to kind of tie up both of these thoughts that you had because the captaincy and Giorgio play a huge role in this episode. So the table was Pike's table in Pike's version of the Ready Room on Discovery. And the fact that it's still there is kind of like this ship is haunted by the captain's past of the Discovery. And then also we have Giorgio herself, but not this mirror universe Giorgio that we live with, but Prime Giorgio is inferred a couple of times. First of all, Giorgio tells Saru to take swift and aggressive action against Wen and the intruders, and Saru says Starfleet does not fire first, which was a direct quote from Captain Giorgio in season 1, episode 1 of Discovery. And then the episode ends with the telescope that Saru unpacks, which of course was Prime Captain Giorgio's telescope from her ship, which she commanded. And it was bequeathed to Michael upon her death, but Michael gave it to Saru almost as an offer of reconciliation towards the end of that first season arc. So yeah, all the captaincy and the way things have been done in the past and growing through change, and Giorgio kind of hovering, all kind of tie in there in this episode subtly. I love it.
Good catch and summarization, Shane. Be proud of yourself.
It's my job. I love it.
And then I guess the only two other things just to flag, we kind of talked about it with the Trill, but so the Trill is the symbiont, but the species that they're supposed to join with is not human, right? They've got the freckles down the side, and so the character Adira is struggling to internalize, and we kind of saw it in Next Generation too. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because they've got all of this information. They are an admiral, but they're also a 16-year-old, and they don't know how to mesh it all together. There's no process for it. So I'm interested to see where they take that from the just Star Trek nerd perspective. And then the kind of repartee between Book and Michael when he's putting on the uniform. So he's she's clearly been talking up the Federation and her ideals still through all this time, over the years. And he says, "You've been waiting for this, to see him in a Star Trek uniform, so that he buys into the ideals." And he obviously has not. He's not interested in it. But it's interesting to see, will he convert by the end of the season, or is it Michael who's that really touching moment with Tilly in the hall after the hair compliment, where they have a very adult conversation, and Tilly recognizes that Michael has let go of them. They've all been dead to her, and she's obviously happy that they're back, but that has changed their relationship.
Just to tie everything all up, I have to mention that Book says that he gets a rash from that same damned uniform, which I think is a little Easter egg from the Next Generation Season 1 uniforms, those nasty spandex uniforms that gave everyone in the cast a horrible rash.
Yeah, like in real life, right? Real life rashes.
Yeah. That's all I have to say on the episode. I think that's all we can say about the episode. It has been a long and fruitful discussion that I have absolutely loved. I want to thank once again our very special ambassador, Divyesh Mystery. Thank you, Divyesh. How can people follow you on social media?
So you can find me on Twitter mostly @_DivyeshM. That's the main channel that I tweet about basically everything.
Fantastic. We will look for you there. I, of course, am Shane Came Back. Ravi is Ravi Joshi. Ron is @Ron Sly. You can follow us on Twitter @WorseThanBorg or @WorseThanTheBorg on Instagram. You can email us at worsethantheborg@gmail.com. And please remember to subscribe and rate us 5 stars. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. As always, we have been Worse Than the Borg, and you have been assimilated into our collective, but resistance is never futile. Hailing frequencies closed.
Babe, is that a new ending?
I'm trying it out. We'll see what